A little introduction. My name is Katie Kamler. I'm a horticulture specialist for MU Extension. I cover the East Central region of Missouri, and I'm headquartered in St. Genevieve. So I'm about 60 miles south of St. Louis. I enjoy talking about native plants, and I enjoy taking walks in the woods and looking at different native plants. This is a picture here that I took of a native planting, and this is at Jefferson Farm in Columbia. It's one of the MU research farms, and they have some extensive native plantings that are really neat, and it was fun to take some really good pictures there one year when we happened to be there. I'm an informal presenter. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to ask those, and I will try to watch the chat, or if you raise your hand or what have you, and you have a question as we go, please feel free to ask that. My format today is I've got some things about why natives and that type of thing, and then I've got several top 10 lists that have different plants that work for different conditions. So as I said, if you have questions, feel free to let me know, and I'm going to be trying to watch and make sure I let everybody in also. So why natives? They do well here in Missouri. I always tell people that we have challenges here in Missouri because we're in that in-between climate zone. So we get cold in the winter, we get hot in the summer, we have challenging soils. In some cases, depending on where you're at in the state, I always say we grow rocks better than anybody else also. So there are lots and lots of reasons and things to think about as far as natives, because they are going to be successful here with our challenging climate, with our challenging soils, all of those things. Natives have great diversity. It's amazing to look and see all the different kinds of plants that are out there, and I'm constantly learning some new ones. Here lately, I've been following, it's an Illinois site, so just across the river from me, and it's a Facebook page that he goes all over Southern Illinois and looks at rare and endangered plants. And I always learn something new and see new plants by following this Facebook page. So there is so much diversity out there. Also know that exotic plants can become invasive. Some natives can be invasive also. Invasive means they spread easily. But we really don't like those exotic invasives that we see more and more and more of all the time. This time of year, several become very visible, like the Callery or Bradford pear. Here shortly, they will be blooming, and you will notice them everywhere in fields, in forests, along the roadside. So we really prefer not to have or introduce those invasive ones. They can really help with stormwater management, filtering out stormwater, helping reduce some of that, filtering out some fertility or runoff issues, all of those things. Less maintenance, that depends. Some of it is less maintenance as far as fertility goes and such. Some of them, you may not like the look at them, so they may require some trimming or different things like that. It just really depends on what you want your landscape to look like, how much maintenance is involved. And of course, the natives do provide wildlife habitat. Sometimes I think we have too much wildlife habitat when they're eating everything that I enjoy and like in the garden, but that could also be your goal, that you want to attract certain wildlife to your area. So some wildflower basics, start with plants, not seeds. This is easier for identification purposes. You know what you've got. It also helps outcompete weeds. The other reality is that a lot of the wildflower mixed seed packets or different things like that, In some of those mixes, we've also found that a lot of them can have weed seeds in them, weed seeds that we don't really want to introduce. So it is easier, particularly if you're new to natives, to start with plants instead of seeds. That also helps you with spacing. You can space them out appropriately, thinking about, while this plant may be small right now, it gets bigger, or so you look at that full grown size, space them out appropriately. It also makes it easier to think about design, what kind of design you want for that flower bed. Mulch is one of my favorite garden tips or tricks. Mulching those beds soon after you plant them helps prevent weeds from coming up. It keeps the moisture levels even, helps prevent diseases from soil splashing up on the plants. So mulch can be extremely helpful. You want to amend the soil in shady flower beds because plants that grow natively in the shade, they prefer 3 to 4 inches of organic soil. You know, when you think about in a shady area, typically shade means trees, which have leaf litter and all of that makes that organic layer on the soil. Sunny flower beds, you don't need to amend those. Think about a lot of where our sunny plants are growing: hot, dry, clay soils, all of those tough spots that a lot of our natives will grow in. Fertilizer or pH, soil tests, fertilize when you first plant, but typically, because our natives are used to those difficult conditions, it's not going to need much. You just want to try to get those plants established, and then after that, not really any need for fertility. Watering. You want to water to establish them, particularly plants, and then only when necessary to meet the requirements of what that specific plant is. So typically, once we get them established, we're not going to have to water unless there's something like a drought of 2012, like we experienced then. Everything was suffering regardless of whether it was native or not, because that was a bit of an extreme drought. Deadheading. In traditional flower gardens, a lot of times we do deadhead. Deadheading typically encourages new flower production in annuals in particular, or roses. We talked about that. But in natives, it really depends on what your goal is, because if you leave dead flowers on that have seeds, that could attract a different type of wildlife. So I know the finches come in droves when my coreopsis is done blooming, because they're after the seeds. They also come in and feed on the seeds of the coneflower heads. So depends on what the goal is. Also, I kind of like to think leaving those seed heads does provide food for different animals and birds, but it also provides some winter interest in the garden too if you leave those. Don't forget to weed. Sometimes some people don't like natives or wildflowers because they say they look weedy. And in some cases they can actually be weedy or have weeds. So remember to look and know what your weed is, what your native is, and what your goal is for that garden. Encourage shade-loving flowers to reproduce. You can remove the leaf litter by the end of February so they can seed themselves in, and you can get some spread there. Example of this I like to use is that as a kid, I always loved bloodroot. It was a native plant that my grandma showed me the first time, and it was one that I would write a smiley face on my hand or your name, because that's what grandma showed us how bloodroot was. But as an adult, I really enjoy the flower. They are so pretty and the leaves are so unique. Well, a master gardener gave me a start. I'd always just seen them in the woods, but a master gardener gave me a start of bloodroot, and I did not have a spot for it where I live, so I planted it at my parents', in a shady area, and it is fascinating to see when you rake off those leaf litter how much that has expanded, and they have bloodroot all over in that flower bed now. So just by doing that simple thing, it has spread and created a great ground cover. You clean the beds annually. Just think about your typical garden cleanup, and think about, as I said, depending on what your goal is, and looking at that. So now we're in my top 10 list. So these are top 10 lists from the Grow Native website. I really appreciate the Grow Native website for their lists and their resources. They have a really good spot to look things up and think about learning about all of the different plants that are available. So shade gardens. Shade can be very challenging for a lot of people in their landscape. So we do have some natives that do well in shade. And also a lot of people are looking for ground covers. So some of these could also be considered ground covers. So wild ginger is one that is considered a ground cover. It stays short. It has those heart-shaped leaves. It has an interesting bloom, not necessarily very noticeable for most people, but it does have a neat kind of maroon colored bloom. Oak sedge. So there are lots and lots of sedges out there. The one that most people are familiar with is yellow nut sedge. That's the invasive in your lawn, flower bed, vegetable garden that everybody hates. But we do have a lot of interesting native sedges that work great. So in this case, this is an oak sedge. It is a clump grass and it tolerates dry soils. And a great name, oak sedge. So if you've got a place under trees that typically they stay dry, this is a great plant for that. And you can see in the right, it also has this interesting little spiky bloom. Beak grass. This isn't one that I'm familiar with or have been around, but it is considered a ground cover and it fills in and helps reduce maintenance. So some of these, as I said, are good options for those shady areas where you can't grow lawn. These are a good spot to try. And it's known as beak grass for that seed head that you see in this picture. Beautyberry has gained a lot of popularity in probably the last 15 years or so. It is a lower shrub. It can get a fairly good size. It is easy to prune. It has flowers, but they're not really very noticeable. It is known for these magenta berries in early winter, and they will hold those berries through the winter season. So it provides some winter interest. And those clusters of berries are very noticeable. Little flower allium root. It has a mounding growth habit, so looks different than some of the others we just mentioned. It is a small perennial and it blooms in the fall. So we like to have that diversity of bloom. Particularly for a lot of our pollinators that are moving around. And so things that bloom in the fall are a good addition to the garden. Roundleaf groundsel, this is another ground cover type and it tolerates those dry soils and stays evergreen. So we do like to have that mixture and have some plants that stay green year round also adds interest to the landscape. Maidenhair fern. I love all the different kinds of ferns, and we have quite a few different native ferns. This maidenhair has a really nice texture that looks different with those intricate fronds that you can see. And typically this is a fern that is upright and is great to add that green background in a shade garden. Wild hydrangea, this is a neat one to actually see out in the woods, but is available as a low shrub and tolerates that wide array of conditions. And then, of course, you get the hydrangea type of blooms. So you can see in the picture, it looks somewhat different than what you think about as far as your landscape type or cultivated varieties of hydrangea, but another pretty nice shrub to have. Last one's on the shade garden, this broadleaf goldenrod. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of different kinds of goldenrod. Sometimes goldenrod gets a bad rap for being the cause of allergies in the fall. Goldenrod is not the cause. It is actually ragweed, but goldenrod gets the blame because its bloom is noticeable with it being yellow compared to the green blooms of the ragweed. This particular goldenrod is considered a ground cover, and it gets 18 to 20 inches tall, and another one that blooms in the fall. Indian pink has become a new favorite in the last probably 10 years I've had a plant. It is upright. It has those firecracker looking red flowers with the yellow star on top. It blooms early summer and is one that I have, as I said, really enjoyed. It was one that I was not familiar with, but bought it at a plant sale and have really enjoyed it. So sun gardens, shining blue star. This one is a bush. It is a herbaceous, so it does die back in the wintertime. It can tolerate some shade. This is one I got from a master gardener. I do enjoy it. It is that light blue flowers. It does make a nice kind of roundish mounding bush. I would say it can get up to around 3 feet tall. My only problem with it is that it seeds itself prolifically. So you have to either control those seedlings, which is very easy. Underneath, you can take a hoe and take down those seedlings. But just realize that is one that's why I got it from a master gardener, because they came up everywhere. So as I said, there is a distinction between native and invasive, because several different kinds of plants can be invasive. We can have native invasives also. But I really enjoy the texture and those blooms on that blue star. Butterfly milkweed, one that a lot of people are familiar with, particularly with the interest for monarchs. Typically orange flowers, although some can be more reddish or more yellow. We have a lot of variety in that native population. Typically more of a mound and great butterfly nectar source if it blooms. I have several in my flower bed. I have not got to see them bloom because they are also the leaves are a great food source for the monarch larva also. And it is the last milkweed that they will get on, but when everything else is gone, they get on that one. Aromatic asters. It is bush mound shape, and it has an impressive late season color. So it is one that blooms in the fall. There are quite a few native asters, but the aromatic one, as you can see, makes quite the show. Another one, false blue blue false indigo. There are several native indigos or false indigos. This one tends to be a bush, has those spikes of blue flowers, and can be extremely long-lived. In the fall, they also put these seed pods on that are hard and look like beans. One caution with indigo is that it is toxic to livestock, so farmers don't really like to have that one around. Just be aware of that. Another sedge, this is palm sedge. So the oak sedge likes shade. This palm sedge is a same mounding type habitat, but it will do well in sun and also excellent for rain gardens because it will take those moist areas and filter water. Purple coneflower is one that lots of people are familiar with. Lots of different kinds of coneflowers out there, but the purple coneflower is one of the natives. And actually we have, I don't know, 5 or 6 probably native types of coneflowers. It is upright, tolerates some shade. I have some that have seeded themselves in different areas of my flower bed. So sometimes when I see them up, they get dug up and moved to a different spot. And this is a picture of one I took with a bee on it from my flower bed. So the butterflies also love them. And this last year, I was sitting on my porch and I happened to glance over at my flower bed and noticed that the coneflower was looking kind of brown. And I was like, what's going on over there? So I get up and I walk over and happened to notice that it had caterpillars on it. And they were a black caterpillar that kind of had spikes on them. And so then I did some research and come to find out, I think it was the silvery checker spot larva of a really pretty butterfly that I did not even realize that coneflower and the black-eyed Susans or Rudbeckia are a food source for them. So I got to watch those caterpillars and then seed the butterflies later in the season. So that was a different one that I got to see and didn't know about until I was observing my garden. Copper iris. This is an upright native iris. It is excellent for rain gardens. I have this in a flower bed also that stays wetter on the north side of my house. It does spread out and fill in areas, but it is a neat native, and particularly, as I said, for wetlands, but or rain gardens. Slender mountain mint. This is more of a bush and it's a great butterfly nectar source. It's not one that I have grown, but it looks like an interesting one that I might need to try in the future because I have regular mints and it's fun to watch them bloom because I have never seen so many different pollinators as on the blooms of that mint. So this is one I think I need to try in my garden. Orange coneflower or Rudbeckia in this case, or sometimes they're referred to as black-eyed Susans. There are numerous varieties of these under numerous names depending on what you're looking for, but there are native ones. And it's a great butterfly nectar source. They really enjoy those flowers and make for great photo ops. They also make good cut flowers for flower arrangements. Prairie dropseed is another native grass. It is mounding and likes rocky soils. So it adds that nice different texture in the garden. And as you can see, I think in the center of this looks like it's butterfly weed that is getting ready to bloom. So good for in a mix also. Now we're going to move to small flowering trees. So pawpaws are a native. 20 to 30 feet tall. They like to attract the zebra swallowtail butterflies, or their larva feeds off the leaves. Pawpaws are interesting because typically you don't just have one. They root colonize, so you have multiples. They have this brownish, maroonish bloom in the springtime. And however, don't go sniffing it because it smells bad, because it's pollinated by flies. So they have a smell, an odor that attracts flies for pollination purposes. And then of course, pawpaws are edible if you can beat critters to them, and they pollinate and everything goes well. There's getting to be more and more research on looking at pawpaw as for fruit production in Missouri, but it can be challenging. Hornbeam is a native one. I have a coworker that she has one in her yard and really enjoys it. 10 to 15 feet tall, and it has a really unique horizontal branch and different texture for a tree in the landscape. And you can see the neat drupelets and different texture there. And I'm not sure if those are the starts of the flowers or if that's later on, and that's the seed on that one. Red Buckeye. This one is one of my favorites in the last probably 10 or 15 years. It wasn't one that I was familiar with or knew until once again, Master Gardener gave me a start, and really enjoy those red bloom spikes that bloom early in the spring. And they are one of the first things that attracts hummingbirds. They love those. Typically kind of a mounding round shape. And once I knew what it was, then I could start spotting it actually in native areas or cover that I would see the red buckeye, particularly when it's blooming. So it's one that I have enjoyed, as I said, in the last 10 to 15 years. That is just a neat, different small tree for the landscape. Serviceberry, always was familiar with serviceberry. They a lot of times people think that the first thing white blooming in the woods is dogwood. It is not. It is serviceberry. But didn't realize, other than driving and saying, "Oh yes, the serviceberry is blooming," that up close, the flowers of serviceberry are just beautiful. The white. And interestingly enough, here at my office in the parking lot, they actually have some serviceberries planted as ornamentals in the parking lot. And how I figured this out, it's in a spot that I don't walk by very often, but I happened to walk that direction when there were berries on them. And the berries are edible and taste very good, but you have to beat the birds to them. So I just hit it right. And that's when I figured out that we had serviceberry in the parking lot. It looks like I've got a couple questions. How did they give you a start of the red buckeye? The seeds. So the buckeye seeds, they need to be planted pretty much as soon as they fall off the tree. Because otherwise they dry out and they're not viable. Actually, let's see, I have one here on my desk that the Master Gardener brought in. So these were old and dried out, but they are planted just from seed, and they germinate in the fall, and that's how they come. And it is red because that's native, it's not grafted. There are lots of different kinds of buckeyes. We have Ohio buckeye. They're bigger tree, bloom green. It's not as noticeable. And there's some horse chestnuts. There's some ornamental buckeyes. There's lots of different kinds out there. But the red buckeye and Ohio buckeye are native to Missouri. When does red buckeye bloom? Here, unfortunately, I haven't seen what my parents look like, but probably here in the next month. They are one of the early bloomers, typically about the time columbine blooms and when the hummingbirds are starting to move in. Another one, spring bloomer, redbud. Most everybody is familiar with redbud, 15 to 20 feet tall. They have pink flowers in the spring. There are some different shades of redbud. If you notice when they're blooming here shortly, that some are lighter pink, some are darker pink. And actually, we do have a horticultural variety that is white. There's also lots of other horticultural varieties with leaf color. They're purple leaf. There's a newer one that has kind of a lime green color on the leaves. So there's lots of different ones out there. And another quick caveat that the flowers are edible. So you can sprinkle those flowers into a salad. They kind of have a nutty taste, and add a little color to the salad and eat some natives there. Fringe tree. This is one that I'm not as familiar with. It is beautiful. 10 to 15 feet tall, has those fragrant white flowers in the spring. One concern is that I believe it was in Kentucky or Tennessee, they are seeing some problems with fringe tree having issues with emerald ash borer. So it is another species that apparently emerald ash borer does go after a bit. I haven't heard anything lately on that, but that might be a concern. Flowering dogwood. This is one that everybody loves. It's our and see, I've got to think about this because I always get confused if it's a state flower or state tree, because hawthorn is also a tree. So one of the two, it's the state flower or state tree. I forget which is which. It has red berries in the winter. Of course, it is known for those beautiful flowers. One thing that I get calls about with problems with dogwood in a lawn area is that they are shade trees in their native habitat. So they really don't like to be a specimen tree planted full sun in your yard. Some varieties can tolerate that. They're getting more horticultural varieties. And of course, there's pink and red dogwoods also that are the flowering dogwood. But if you have a spot that isn't shady or isn't an understory area, you really want to look at variety when you're planting that. If you have an understory area, a flowering dogwood is a great choice for that because they like that shade. The other interesting thing is not just flowering dogwood. We have lots of other native dogwoods that are great in the landscape that people don't necessarily think about because their blooms aren't as big and pretty as the flowering dogwood. So there's gray dogwood and silky dogwood and more out there. Green hawthorn is 15 to 20 feet tall. They get orange berries in the fall. And of course, you see that pretty hawthorn flower in the springtime. One concern about hawthorns is, I don't know if you're familiar with cedar apple rust. There's also a cedar hawthorn rust that can cause the leaves to have spots on them. So just be aware that that might be an issue. Witch hazel, this is a favorite one. I don't have one. I enjoy seeing them when I can. Native witch hazels around 10 feet, fragrant yellow flowers because they bloom in the wintertime. So actually they most likely are done blooming by now. December, January, February is when we see those spiky blooms. We also, I believe there are 2 native witch hazels to Missouri. And one, it has more orange color blossoms than this yellow. They turn yellow in the fall, just a unique, different small tree because of that bloom time. Wild plum is another one, 10 to 15 feet, attracts many butterflies because of those blooms. Also, I believe it is a food source, the leaves are. And of course, you get plums. Plums are actually one of my favorite fruits, and the native plums are very good to eat also. Just have to take care of those pits, and wildlife like them too. And now we're going to move on to, I think this is our last top 10 list, and this is for pollinators. So we already talked about the aromatic aster, but 2 feet tall, that mounding fall flowers. So this is particularly a benefit to those pollinators that move, are migrating, like the monarchs. They need that fall nectar source in order to have something to feed off and get energy to head on their migration. Ladies' eardrops. This is a woody vine, really attracts bees. It is not one I am familiar with at all, but it does have that very unique looking flowers, and apparently is really attractive to the bees when it is blooming. Milkweed, marsh milkweed or swamp milkweed, 4 to 5 feet tall. Loves butterflies, beetles, bees. This is one that I have in my flower bed. There are lots and lots of different kinds of milkweeds out there, which is also kind of fun to see the different types. This was kind of an unusual one that it actually bloomed, because the last few years I've had so many monarch caterpillars that typically I don't get to see blooms because they eat everything. But it is fun to watch those pollinators on it when it blooms. A native bumblebee here. The actual butterflies themselves get on it. Something else that is interesting that I've had fun watching is that we get monarch aphids, or not monarch, milkweed aphids. And milkweed aphids are orange, and a lot of times they will cover the entire stems of the milkweed. But we don't really have any good control methods for those, because we don't want to try to control the aphids and kill our pollinators and our caterpillars. So leaving them go and watching them has been interesting, because then I've had parasitic, beneficial parasitic wasps that have come in and predated the aphids. I've had lacewing larvae that I've gotten good pictures of eating the aphids, and ladybug larvae eating the aphids. So it is fun to watch those insects on there. And I've also watched a crab spider reached out and grabbed a butterfly that was on there. So, you know, they're not selective. And I've also watched an assassin beetle on one that got a bumblebee. So I've really enjoyed, and particularly when we were working from home with COVID, it was really fun to observe those plantings and see all the insects and the activity on those. And it looks like I missed an in on that. That's not Easter blazing, it's Eastern blazing star. It's 3 to 4 feet, attracts butterflies. This is a fun one to do from, you can do this from seed. Sometimes it looks a little like grass when it's coming up, but I scatter the seed too from after they bloom. This one has that poker or solid bloom. There are some natives rough blazing star that the flowers are more spaced out. There's also a horticultural variety that's white. So there's lots of neat ones. It's one that I really enjoy in the garden also. And this was a picture from that native planting at Jefferson Farm again. Another one for pollinators. This is, hold on, Eastern blazing star. Is it full sun? Yes, it is full sun. Typically you will find it on glades and rocky and rough areas on the roadside in the Ozarks. And in some cases in prairies also, that prairie type areas. Robin's plantain, this is 3 to 5 inches tall. It is a ground cover. You get those little daisy-like flowers, and this is good for digger bees. So some of the ground nesting bees like this habitat. Once again, that slender mountain mint, 1 to 2 feet tall. So bees, wasps, butterflies. Once again, one that I need to try because I want to see how that works. Foxglove beard tongue. This is 2 to 3 feet tall. Bumblebees absolutely love it. There's another name, pinstemon is another name for beard tongue. We do have quite a few varieties of native beard tongue. This one I do have in a flower bed, and really enjoy those spikes. They are early season, so typically around May or so that they are blooming, and make a nice, they do spread out, make a nice ground cover. There are lots of horticultural varieties of penstemon too. And they really do attract pollinators, and pollinators like them. And they are one that I have really enjoyed in the garden, all different types of penstemon or beard tongue. Wild bergamot, bee balm, monarda, whatever name you want to call it. Typically 3 to 4 feet tall. Bees, hummingbirds, moths, butterflies, all like it. There are horticultural varieties of this. Also, this is the native, kind of that pinky purple color. There are reds out there. So that is a nice one. One thing I have noticed is kind of like zinnias and other things, it does get powdery mildew, but typically doesn't affect its blooming or much else. It just kind of looks not as pretty with the powdery mildew on it. And the last one, wild hydrangea. We already mentioned the wild hydrangea, but 3 to 5 feet, so a larger plant, and bees, butterflies, wasps all enjoy those flowers. And mentioned that there's lots and lots of kinds of goldenrod. This is a cliff goldenrod. It is a more mounding or almost trailing type, that 2 feet tall. And of course, bees, beetles, butterflies all really enjoy that goldenrod in the fall. Another one that's a late season bloomer that provides that nectar source for our insects late in the season. And then resources, as I said, all the top 10 lists, and they've got many, many more out there. If you want a ground cover, if you want a rain garden, if you want to attract hummingbirds, whatever you're looking for, they've got lots of great top 10 lists for native plants. Missouri Department of Conservation, of course, has great resources on all native plants, MU Extension. And then I love using Missouri Wildflower Nursery's website and their catalog just as a resource because they have great pictures in there and information. And of course, Keeling Nursery is also a great source. TheGrowNative.org also will tell you where you can purchase plants and other sources for those too. What questions do you have? I appreciate questions if you have them, because that way it doesn't feel like I talk to myself for 45 minutes, okay? Well, if you don't have anything, Sarah will be back from vacation next week. Oh, does redbud work well as a sun landscape plant? Actually, redbud is one that will do well in sun or shade. It can do either. Any other questions? All right, we'll call it a day. And where might we get the Buckeye seeds? Looking for them, asking around. I don't know if plants, I'm sure Missouri Wildflower Nursery and probably Forest Keeling actually sell plants. That one, I'm not sure. And just talking and knowing people, because I have a master gardener that brings me red buckeyes every fall. And now that my parents have one, my mom had to show me that under the tree that the buckeyes had fallen and they were starting to sprout last fall. Ladies' eardrops, what wild area habitat do they grow in? I am honestly not sure. That is just not one that I was familiar with at all, except for the fact that it was on that top 10 list and that I looked it up. But yeah, I don't know on that one. Any others? All right, enjoy the rest of your day. And Sarah will be back from vacation next week. Hopefully she had a good one and is all rested up.